Hey YouTube, in this video I want to get into this idea of a nomad work schedule. Now this is by no means an absolute kind of rule set, but just some tips that might help you. So before we get into it, go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. The channel is Alex Living Abroad. We talk about expat life, living in other countries, working in other countries, of course, legally, and doing all these things. So yeah, just go ahead and join if you haven't already, and let's go ahead and get into it. So the first thing I'm going to get into here is that you should really plan out your work week. A lot of people I hear about wanting to pursue the nomad life, living abroad, they assume if they just buy a ticket to another country and book accommodation, that an online business will somehow sprout up or emerge. This has not been my experience at all. But so definitely, I think one of the things that stops people from being engaged and proactive in the process is that they don't really make any plans. They treat it like, okay, I'm going on vacation for a month or a few months and whatever happens, happens. But I think that the ideal is that you plan ahead and decide, okay, I'm going to work from this hour to that hour every day, Monday through Friday. Typically, a lot of people like to work 40 hours a week. I'm not going to tell you how many hours you should or shouldn't work, but really you should have a regular work schedule that you follow. You can get in a habit and a routine where you're making consistent progress on what you need to be doing to make money. For some of you, that may include managing assets, but definitely make time for that every single week ahead of time so that you plan your day around that and you don't just try to squeeze that in whenever it's convenient. It really needs to be a central focus if you are talking about doing this with longevity. The next step I'm going to mention here, you should designate some work cafes. So if you know where you're going to be staying in a given country, definitely map out some cafes in that neighborhood. If it is the kind of neighborhood with remote working spots, not just Starbucks, but local spots as well. Perhaps there's spots that serve smoothies. Plan these locations out where you know, hey, I can go work at these places. Some people don't like to work at their accommodation. They find that they just have a difficult time getting into the rhythm of working and getting things done. And so for those of you, those of you whom that is the case, then be sure that you know about these places ahead of time, that you know where you're going to be working at, what kind of opportunities that these places offer, the Wi-Fi speed, do they offer printing if you need to print, is it just cafe beverages or do they also sell food? Because it might be a situation where you get it there at 10 a.m., order a drink, have an early lunch at 11, and you can stay until say 1 or 2 p.m. working. And that really offers opportunity to have focused work in a space that should be well kept and offer you nourishment so you can really be productive and get what you need to get done, and also have caffeine for those of you who like coffee. Knowing where these cafes are at will save you time on the ground trying to check them out. You could also look at reviews, find out what other people potentially other travelers are saying about these places, because some places are going to be better than others, and you really want to know what the advantages and disadvantages are of each spot. Some spots will offer co-working memberships where you can pay a monthly fee and work there, as long as you want, not necessarily committed to purchasing food or beverages, but you've got an office space. So for some of you that maybe the place doesn't serve the food that you like, but it's quiet and it's a productive space. That's also something to consider, that some of these cafes, while you may not like their food or drink choices, then they may still have options for you to work on things. Alongside that, and it's somewhat related to the tip I just talked about and mentioned, but definitely find co-working spaces. Co-working spaces and cafes are not the same thing. There's certainly going to be some elements of each one and the other, just as far as the modern economy and people working on computers a lot, needing Wi-Fi, food and beverages, etc. But find these co-working spots. There's co-working spots in most major cities around the world. Even many moderate or modest-sized cities have at least one co-working spot. And you want to go and check these places out. And I know a lot of people will say, well, are you looking to meet other entrepreneurs? Not so much. I think that if you know what you're doing, you don't necessarily need to spend a lot of time socializing with other entrepreneurs. Not saying you shouldn't be social, but I think some people do get in this habit of, well, as long as I'm socializing and I'm in Chiang Mai, or as long as I'm socializing, I'm in Medellin, I'm getting things done. And that's not always the case. some people, myself included, I tend to lose track of time when I'm socializing, and that can really interrupt my productivity. So really think about that, though, that some of these places, if your accommodation doesn't have the best internet, or perhaps it's not on the quietest block, or there's some other aspect of it that makes it perhaps difficult to get things done, maybe you don't have the nicest desk, then finding a co-working spot that you really like, that you can get to in a short amount of time. I wouldn't advocate for getting one, say, an hour away, but if you can find one within, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes walking distance, maybe 30 minutes walking distance if you really like to walk like I do. And that way, once again, you have spaces that are productivity spaces where you're not scrambling trying to figure out, how am I going to be productive at my hotel? I booked a hotel that's too far away from these spaces to work, and my hotel isn't the most there's a lot of things that can really hamper your ability to get things done and to work on things. And that's why I think it's valuable for at least some of us to find these spaces that are specifically geared toward working. Even though you may feel like you're on vacation, you still need some of these elements that, if you do need to work on things, that can lend themselves to that. The next thing I'll mention here is that you really should find some local lunch spots, and these are going to be different for everybody. Everybody has different food preferences. Some people are vegan, some people are carnivores. I know I've got all kinds as far as my audience is concerned, but really think about what you want to be eating, and don't just try to wing it, because I found in some instances I end up going for junk food that I wouldn't have eaten otherwise because I didn't really research the neighborhood. I know some of these tips are related to researching where you're going to stay and what that looks like, what that neighborhood is like, what the options are like, but know in advance at least a few options where you can get a relatively decent meal for a reasonable price, so you don't feel like, at least for the first few weeks, that you're kind of scrambling to try to figure out good solutions to when you need to eat, when you need to get coffee. And I assure you that if you are in a substantially sized city, just about anywhere in the world, you're going to be able to find decent food options. I'm not going to say they're always going to be affordable. Of course, if you're in an expensive place, food is going to be more expensive, but knowing about what's out there preemptively can really save you some hassle. In fact, asking some friends as well, hey, have you been to this city? Where did you eat? What did you like to eat when you were there? What are the local dishes that I really have to try when I'm there in that city and experiencing that culture? What are some places to avoid? Was there anything that you felt like was overrated? Maybe a certain nightlife venue, or certain restaurant, certain neighborhood that just wasn't what it was made out to be. These kinds of things can really help you in narrowing down your decisions and to what will best serve you as far as your needs. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into the final tip here. The final thing I'm going to mention here is that you really want to consider time zone differences. Different people are working in different time zones, and if you're needing to meet people in other countries or other parts of the world, then if you find a space to work in, let's say you find a great co-working space, well, if they close at a certain hour and you need to meet after that, you need to have backup plans. That's a big part of this kind of work schedule thing, I'd say, is having backup plans, not just doing your research up front, but let's say you've got to meet somebody at, I don't know, 9 p.m. your time to 10 p.m. And the co-working space, they're closed at, say, I don't know, 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. Well, you kind of want to figure out where you're going to have that meeting. I had some challenges with that in Medellin, and I wish I'd done a little bit more pre-planning to know, hey, there are these co-working spaces that rather than try to sort out a situation at my hotel where they started doing construction all around my room, starting at like 8 a.m. going till 6 p.m. Instead of dealing with that, I should have just hopped in a cab, gone to a co-working space, and I would have been settled. But even in that instance, if I had meetings or needed to do things after hours, which I did, then it would have been nice to have some alternatives lined up. Maybe there's a certain coffee shop that their business slows down, but they're still open later. These kinds of things are worth researching and keeping in mind. So I hope this video has been helpful. Definitely keep these things in mind. We talked about planning out your work week. We talked about designating certain cafes to work in. We talked about finding local lunch spots. We talked about considering different time zones. All these things, I think, go into successfully setting yourself up to be productive and not just treating whatever trip you're on like a vacation. I don't mean to be critical or condescending, but just these are some of the things that I've made the mistake of doing. Certain trips I've gone on thinking I was going to be super productive, get a lot of things done, and ended up not being organized enough to really get what I needed to get done. And so I felt some level of regret that I hadn't used my time most efficiently, and I don't want you guys to feel that way. So like I said before, subscribe if you haven't already, comment down below. I want to hear your thoughts. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you next time.